Well, hello there, Tankers of the Blitz universe. I'm Flossie, and in this video, I will be ranking every single Tier 10 Christmas vehicle that has ever been released. There are 8 of them, and since Christmas is almost upon us, I figured this was a perfect video to make, as I also have not seen anyone else do this video yet on YouTube. So this will be a first, and I think it's going to be a very fun video to kind of showcase to you which tanks are good from these Christmas snow globes, which ones are bad, and which ones that you should honestly just avoid. So let's break on into my tier list here. I have in fact made one, and in true Flossie fashion, I had to make the goofiest tier list names ever. So of course, to start things off, we have fair and balanced. These are tanks that are clearly fair and balanced, guys. They're very, very good for the game, right? Next up, we have strong, which are obviously strong tanks. We have meh, which are okay. They're not terrible, but they're not the best either. And then we have nah bro, which are tanks that I just would not want to play at all. And then finally, we have the NA server, which, well, it speaks for itself, guys. Anyways, that is my tier list, so we're going to get right on into it. And to start things off, we're going to take a look at the Concept 1B. This is a tank that was released a couple of years ago, and honestly, it is one of the best tier 10 heavies in the entire game. There's so many good things going for it. You have a gun that has a lot of DPM for a heavy tank. You have an insane gun depression amount at 10 degrees for how low down this tank is. You have actually really, really good dispersion, good aim time. Overall, the Concept is just a fantastic vehicle, and placing this tank on any hull down ridge in any sort of battle is going to get you a ton of bounces, because of course the turret armor is almost unpennable. Not only do you have fantastic turret armor, you have very good mobility. You go 45 forward and 16 in reverse, so you can get around the map very quickly. And as well, you have an emergency track mechanic, which is a mechanic first available to use on the Yo initially, but they for some reason gave it to the Concept. And this is a tank that Wargaming has continued to give slight tweaks to ever since it's come out into the game, which is really odd to me because the last couple of tweaks were just straight up buffs. They gave it more DPM. I don't know what Wargaming's trying to do in terms of the balancing of this tank, but in terms of where I'm going to be placing this tank deserves to go straight into the fair and balanced category. I don't think there's many other tier 10 heavies that can really compete hull down against a Concept 1B. Next up, for the American tanks, we of course reach the XM66F, the vacuum cleaner, the burger, whatever you want to call this. This tank is absolutely insane. What makes it so good though? This tank of course has a fantastic gun going for it. In terms of its alpha damage, it's a little bit weird. It has very low alpha damage for a tier 10 tank destroyer at only 410 on the standard. However, you make up for that with its insane DPM of 3,400 while using calibrated shells. So honestly, the low alpha damage paired with that DPM, it's a really nice combo, and I'm actually a big fan of this tank's gun. Not only does it have good DPM, it has decent accuracy as well. You have an aim time about 4 seconds, and your dispersion of 0.277 means you're going to be hitting a lot of shots in this tank, and that really helps, especially when you're trying to hit weak spots and use your DPM effectively. Not only does it have all those good things going for it, it also has 10 degrees of gun depression, which means you can work this tank on pretty much every ridgeline. I almost compare this tank to a tank destroyer version of the Concept 1B. Obviously, the turret armor is not as strong as the Concept's, but it is still really, really, really good. And you also have 384 millimeters of heat pen, so not only can you just haul down ridgeline, fight any tank you want, you can also pretty much pen anything you want as well. It's very, very nice there. Moving on to the mobility of this tank, another good thing about it, it goes 40 forward, which for a tank destroyer is pretty stupid. It's very, very quick, and its reverse speed is 20. Yes, you heard that right. Getting in and out of situations in this tank is very easy. And like the Concept 1B, for whatever reason, Wargaming also gave this tank emergency track mechanic as well. I don't understand the reasoning for that. It's already got 20 reverse speed, so why does it need this mechanic? I do not understand. Now, do I personally think this tank is broken or overpowered? Yes, I personally do think this tank is overpowered. So that is why I will be placing it in the same category that the Concept is going into. We're going to be putting it straight up into the fair and balanced category because, of course, it is very fair and balanced. Moving on to tank number 3, we have the VK90. Now, this tank has been out for quite a while, and some of you might not even know that this tank was a Christmas tank at one point in time. So, what is going on with the VK90 right now? Well, in terms of its gun, it has very nice alpha damage. It has 460, which is obviously enough to deal with a lot of your opponents and outtrade some heavies. However, in terms of its gun accuracy, it can be a little bit troll. The dispersion is quite nice, and paired with the fact that this thing has combat stabilization, when you are fully aimed in, this tank will be very accurate, but on the move, this tank's gun is very, very troll. Not quite as troll as a mouse gun, but it's up there for sure. In terms of your penetration, you have some of the highest standard pen out of any tier 10 heavy in the game. You have almost 300 millimeters of AP penetration, which means loading gold in this tank is honestly sometimes not even necessary against certain opponents, which is actually really nice, and it saves you some credits. Another thing is, obviously, the premium penetration on this tank is not so great. You only have 336 millimeters of APCR pen as well, which, well, honestly, it's not the worst thing in the world, but you will struggle to pen certain tanks, especially when you see, like, an E100 turret when they're above you. You're going to struggle to pen that, and certain other heavies, but APCR has its benefits as well. So it's a nice gun overall in terms of that. And you do have 10 degrees of gun depression, but what makes the VK90 super weird is that the gun depression is only 10 degrees when the gun is traversed over the side of the tank. Over the front, it definitely does not have 10 degrees of gun depression, and you have to really position yourself in weird spots to make the gun depression work. In terms of the mobility, obviously this tank is slow because it is a super heavy, and it only goes 30 forward and 15 in reverse, so getting in and out of positions is a little bit tricky. Now, the problem with the VK90 is Wargaming has changed its armor profile around, and honestly, over the years, especially since they have buffed calibrated shells, and especially with AP and heat ammo, the VK90's armor is not as good as it used to be, and that's a real problem because the whole point of this tank is to side scrape and hold off other heavies. And now, honestly, you get buttered right through the turret cheeks, and if you slightly angle the turret, you'll get penned right in the turret side as well, and if you over-angle, you'll get penned in the side armor. It's a little bit tricky nowadays to actually do well in the VK90, and I don't think it's as good as it used to be when it first was released, but that's just my personal opinion. So for me, this tank will be going right on into the meh category. In my personal opinion, the VK90's nothing special, but it's not necessarily a bad vehicle either. It can still hold its own. It's just there are way better heavies out there at the moment. Up next, we have the T-22. Now, this tank needs very little introduction. This was the very first Christmas tank, if I'm not mistaken, in World of Tanks Blitz, and it is absolutely fantastic. This tank recently got a bunch of really weird changes to it in the latest Tier 10 update, which I will explain in a second here. But in terms of its gun, it has fantastic DPM of 3,200 DPM while using calibrated shells. It did get nerfed on its DPM value. I believe it used to have like 3,500, but honestly, it's still pretty good right there. In terms of your accuracy, this tank is also very, very accurate for it being a Russian gun. You have very good aim time, decent dispersion. Overall, you won't have too much trouble hitting your shots in this thing. Your penetration is average for a tier 10 medium, and your alpha damage of 310, although it's a little bit on the lower side, it honestly doesn't matter. And you have 6 degrees of gun depression, which is honestly nothing crazy, but it does the job. And the reason I say the alpha damage is not that bad at being 310, which is obviously the lower side, is because this vehicle has tungsten shells. Yes, you heard that right. Wargaming in the latest update decided they felt the T-22 needed tungsten shells. Don't ask me why they gave it to it, but it's absolutely insane. This tank with tungsten shells and the fact they also buffed the armor profile on it makes it a monster. You will get so many troll bounces in the T-22 just by randomly wiggling around, and even skilled players will still find a way to bounce your side armor as well. I've even seen people reverse side scrape effectively in this tank, which is ridiculous and honestly kind of funny. And in terms of the mobility, you actually have very good mobility as well. You go 56 forward and 20 in reverse. So again, reversing at 20 in a tank like this when wiggling back and forth is going to give you a ton of bounces. So for me personally, the T-22, as it's such a fantastic tank, I'm going to be putting it into the strong category. Now, why am I not putting it into the fair and balanced category? That's because I personally do not think it is a overpowered vehicle. I think that if you know how to penetrate this tank, even though it can be troll, it's still very, very easy to counter it, and there are better medium tanks out there with even weirder abilities and mechanics. Moving along, we have the Badger. Now, this tank has been all over the place since Wargaming released it in the Christmas event a couple years ago. And what I mean by that is, well, first off, the gun. This gun deals 460 damage per shot, which is pretty nice, honestly, and paired with its almost 3,600 DPM while using calibrated shells, it makes it an absolute beast. The problem is this tank has, again, one of the best guns and also one of the worst guns at the same time. It is a really, really weird mix of having insane DPM, very, very good heat pen at 418, and then some of the worst on-movement accuracy you will ever find at tier 10. The overall dispersion and aim time when you're sitting still is honestly not that bad. It's when you turn the gun even slightly or turn the tank slightly, your gun blooms to the size of like 183 dispersion. It is awful, and it's what makes the Badger so very annoying to play. And paired with the fact that you have 10 degrees of gun depression, you think, oh, I can just work a ridgeline, right? And get away with penning people with my crazy pen and great DPM. But the problem is the Badger's armor also doesn't really work. In my opinion, the Badger needs more upper plate armor, as when you are in battle in the Badger, you will find either people are just going to spam the crap out of you with HE, dealing tons of splash damage to you, because this tank, like the Super Conk, it gets HE'd like crazy, or you're just going to find that people will pen your little side boobs or whatever, the lower plate. There's so many different weak spots on the Badger that honestly, for what it is, I don't think the armor is strong enough on it. You're better off driving an E3 in most scenarios. And in terms of your mobility, this tank used to have insane traverse speed, which actually kind of helped it because at least you were able to not get flanked by medium and light tanks as easily. But now Wargaming did nerf the traverse speed, and now it really sucks. Your mobility is awful. You go 36 forward, which is not the worst top speed ever, but your 12 reverse is terrible. That is going to mean that it is almost impossible to get yourself out of a situation you stick yourself in. And paired with the bad traverse speed of only 34 degrees, which might not seem too terrible, but for a tank destroyer that can easily get flanked by medium and lights, yeah, it's not that great. And you're going to find you will get flanked and then HE'd in the rear by pretty much everything. Even some heavies can out-traverse you, which is really, really sad. So the Badger's in a really weird spot. Like, it's always been kind of meh. It hasn't really had a super strong meta ever in the game, I don't think. And for that reason, I'm honestly going to be putting this tank into the nah bro category. I really just don't think this tank is worth getting anymore. It honestly was when it had the traverse speed. It was actually kind of fun. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many downsides to this tank that even the upsides to it are just kind of countered. And for that reason, yeah, it's going into the nah bro category. I don't recommend this tank. And then we reach the French Super Heavy, the AMX M4 MLE. Now, this tank, kind of like the Badger, has been all over the place since it was first released into the game. What I mean by that is you have reactive armor, which the tank came with when it first was released. Then Wargaming decided they wanted to remove that ability, and the tank kind of fell apart. And then they gave it back to the tank, but they also kind of changed the armor profile, and they did a bunch of weird stuff to it. So in terms of the gun, the average damage is only 450, which is a lot less than what the tank used to have. This tank used to have 480 alpha, if I'm not mistaken, and that really allowed you to outtrade a lot of opponents, and it really kind of made up for the fact that the gun is super inaccurate. Nowadays, though, 450 alpha, that's less than some of the other tier 10 heavies that have a lot better guns. And speaking about the gun's accuracy, you have a horrible aim time of almost 4.5 seconds, which is pretty awful. And you have very, very mid dispersion, which even while using a refined gun, you only have 0.312 dispersion, which you're going to be missing a ton of shots in this tank. And it is, like the Badger, extremely frustrating to play, because this tank, if it had slightly more accuracy, it would be so much better. Overall, in terms of your penetration, though, you have very good heat pen. You have 373 heat, so honestly, like, when your shots actually hit, you can pen a lot of vehicles that you go up against. And in terms of your gun depression, you have 8 degrees, so the tank is very flexible. So it has its goods and its bads in terms of the gun. And your mobility is fantastic on this tank. You go 45 forward and 20 in reverse, making this one of the most mobile super heavies in the entire game. And honestly, it makes it really fun because you can just get around the map so quickly. You also do have enhanced sandbag armor, which means that you have a lot of HP, and pairing that with reactive armor, it means that it is a very hard tank to kill. And especially when playing it hull down, it is very effective, yes, but you do have a large hatch on top that a lot of people nowadays know how to pen reliably. And you basically have to be sitting front on in this tank to get any sort of bounces, because the second you show your side armor, you have the corner cutouts that are just weak spots, and they're very, very easy to pen. So yeah, this tank is all over the place. Do I think it is a horrible tank? No. Do I think it is an overpowered tank? Absolutely not. So for that reason, this tank will be going beside the VK90 into the meh category. I do think it's better than a tank like the Badger, but in terms of it being overpowered or super strong nowadays, I do not think that is the case. It is a very easy tank to counter if you know where to pen it. And yeah, there you go. Moving on, we have the brand new Christmas tank, the very newest lion in front of you right here. Now, this is a tank that I have played quite a few battles in so far, and from those games, I can tell you this tank is absolutely fantastic. It basically takes the good things about the Progetto and the Caro and kind of the Leo in some aspects and mixes them all together to create one amazing vehicle. Now, in terms of its gun, you obviously have an auto-reloading gun, but you have a reserve shell, so technically you only want to be using the first 2 shots, which is honestly fine, because in this tank you have almost 2,900 DPM, making it an insane DPM monster considering you have an auto-reloader. And that honestly can surprise a lot of opponents because of how quickly you can reload those 2 shells if you don't dump your reserve shell. In terms of your overall penetration, it's very average, and your average damage at 340 is very nice. This tank also has tungsten shells, which is really odd for an auto-reloader. It's the very first auto-reloader to carry tungsten, and it makes it have higher alpha than the Caro when you do pop that consumable. So you can do a ton of damage in this tank very, very quickly. In terms of your gun handling, this tank kind of has Leo 1 / Progetto. It's in between a little bit. Like, it has very, very good accuracy going for it. Like, you have an aim time of 3 seconds, and your dispersion is pretty solid as well. So chances are you're going to be hitting a lot of your shots in this tank. And considering you have 8 degrees of gun depression, this makes it very, very flexible on a lot of maps. The main problem with this tank, it doesn't have much armor going for it. Instead of a Progetto, which has a troll gun mantlet and weak sides to the turret, this is the complete opposite. You have a very large gun mantlet in the middle, and the strongest parts of the turret are the sides of it. You have a somewhat troll upper plate, and the rest of the armor is completely useless. So even if you're sitting hull down using 8 degrees of gun depression, you can still get penned really, really easy in this tank. And that's really what makes it not overpowered, is the fact that you need to be skilled enough to position yourself in a position where you won't just get instantaneously nuked, and you need to have enough team support to help you out if you get YOLO'd by something with 3,500 DPM. In terms of your mobility, you actually have decent mobility. It's a little bit sluggish off the line, but its top speed of 52 is pretty good, and its reverse speed of 21 is fantastic. So again, this tank is really, really good, and I think honestly for a skilled player, this could technically be slightly overpowered, but for the majority of players, which this tier list is going to be for, I'm going to be putting this into the strong category because I think you can do really well in it. You just honestly have to put yourself in the right positioning, kind of like a Progetto in that way. So it's going into the strong category right there. And last up for 2024, this is the last Christmas vehicle that is currently in the game, the STR-VK. Now, this tank, when it was first released, was an absolute monster. You had insane DPM, higher than most medium tanks in Tier 10, allowing you to just absolutely bully the crap out of any medium you face. However, Wargaming nerfed the medium tank DPM, as well as they removed its super speed boost, which it actually used to have. It's actually kind of insane the amount of overpowered consumables and stuff this tank had going for it when it first was released, which is kind of the reason it was spammed in comp so often. Nowadays, obviously, that doesn't happen. but the tank is still okay. It has a very accurate gun for what it is. You have a good aim time, you have decent dispersion, you also have combat stabilization, which honestly on this tank doesn't really make sense because you're going to be moving around the map a lot in this tank. In terms of your gun average damage, you deal 350, so it's kind of higher than a medium tank, and your penetration is around the same as most medium tanks. So honestly, this is called a heavy tank, but it plays exactly like a medium tank with more HP. You have a lot of gun depression, you have 9 degrees, which makes it very flexible, which is very nice. However, the turret armor on this tank is pretty mid. You have a lot of weak spots. You have the roof above the gun mantlet, you have the sides of the turret beside the gun mantlet, and of course your upper plate is a Kron upper plate, because this of course has the hull of a Kron. So good luck getting bounces on your upper plate unless you are completely fully hull down. So this tank, although it has okay turret armor, this is not a hull down tank at all. You really want to be using your mobility instead of the armor to kind of move around the map, and you have good mobility to do that. You have 47 kilometers an hour of a forward top speed, and you go 16 in reverse, which honestly they could have made it 20 and it would have still been fine. But yeah, overall, I think this tank is okay at the moment. I do not think it's even close to being strong or overpowered. Obviously, this tank also has enhanced sandbag armor, which brings its HP up even a little bit more, which is very nice, especially when you're fighting other medium tanks. But for what it is, I just don't think this tank is in a very good place right now. I think Wargaming should have left the DPM the way it was and just taken away the consumables and maybe even changed something else about it to make it a little bit more balanced when it first came out. But as of right now, it's going to go into the meh category, guys. I just can't really recommend this tank when the E6 exists, which is basically better in every single way, especially since they just buffed the armor profile on it to be absolutely insane. So there you have it, guys. That is my Christmas globe, snow globe tier list right there. You can see none of the tanks made it into the NA server category, which is very good for them. But yeah, you can see, although the Badger is not a great tank, it's still playable and you still can have good games in it. All of the Christmas tanks, most of them are really, really good. The Concept XM, T22, and Lion are the ones that I would recommend you guys pick up in the store if you do see them in the future for a decent price. The rest are okay, but they will need some changing to make it up to the strong and fair and balanced categories. So there you go, guys. Obviously, that is my video on all of the Christmas tanks in the game. I think this was a pretty fun video idea, and I will do more mini tier lists like this in the future. So if you did happen to like this video and you are not yet subscribed to my channel, I highly recommend you do so, as it's a fantastic way to support content like this and stay up to date when I post videos almost daily. And with that, I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye, guys.